Well, something a little bit different, because guess what happened? My GoPro dropped audio off and on throughout this whole video. So I saved it without the sound, and now I'm sort of narrating it. There's going to be parts where my voice comes back. I found as you can see here, an old bike in the woods. It had been there for a long time. There had been vines that wrapped around it. It was abandoned. And it was a Trek 3500, so I picked it up. And one of the reasons why I picked it up is because of this here. That's my old Trek 930. It was bought in the late 80s, early 90s, and I've had it ever since. It's served me well, and the reason why I've kept it is because it's an old chromoly frame. Heavy by today's standards, no shocks, but it's such a solid bike. If you've never ridden on a chromoly frame, you should know that it's a different ride. Now, the bike that I found here has shocks. This one does not. Part of the reason why I wanted to get the Trek 3500 out of the woods where it was abandoned is because it had shocks on it, but it's also an aluminum frame. Very light. Well, sort of light. It's an entry-level bike, as this one here at the time, my Trek 9300, was a sort of mid-range mountain bike at the time. Now, the Trek 3500 is solid frame. That's why I took it. And the forks that you can see pointing up there were completely rusted. They didn't work. It was rusted solid. So it took me some time for me and Bubba to get it out of the woods, and thank goodness it still rolled. The chain on it too, by the way, the crank that I'm spinning there, was completely rusted solid, so you couldn't even pedal the doggone thing. So I picked up the 3500, and I'm going to restore it. I'm not going to do everything on this. I'm going to leave the bottom crank alone, but the aluminum frame is in pristine condition. So that's one of the reasons why I thought, you know what, I'm just going to sort of rescue this from the woods, because it really is, even though it's an entry-level model Trek, probably retailed for around $350, something like that at the time. I can't really date the frame, but let's just say it's probably from around 2013, give or take a few years. And they don't even make the shock on this anymore. So this is not going to be a pristine restore, but it's going to be sort of like a rebuild. Some things are going to be totally changed, new, and some things like the fork here that I'm pointing at are going to be used again. But if I was doing this for some serious bike riding, I would probably change that fork out. The point is to get this thing to work and to work well enough where it can be used for mild use. But again, the reason why, I would take a bike like this just on the frame alone. The frame is really, really, really solid. Trek, even if they're importing some of their bikes, and this one I'm sure was imported from you-know-where, China, it's a solid frame. You can't go wrong. You could build a really good mountain bike for heavy use off of this frame if you wanted to. I, on the other hand, am not. I'm going to keep it stock like I, seem to do everything, and just get it running again. Here's the outer fork that I pounded off with a rubber mallet, and it was tough, and you can probably see just a little bit the rust around the fork itself. The outside of the fork that I pounded off with the rubber mallet there is going to need work, and I'm going to definitely need to do work there on the inner side of the fork that I'm touching. It's in really bad shape. It had been sitting outside in the forest for so long that the rust had eaten through and pitted it in parts. Now, ideally, that is a bad thing, because the forks, and these are spring-loaded forks. Now they're doing like oil-based or air forks, but you pound it right there where on that outer fork that I showed you, and with a rubber mallet, and it comes right off. It just dropped right off the bike. So I'm going to have to do some rust work here, really, to try and get it smooth again, and or at least smooth enough where it will work. But yeah, if you're going to do this for real, and you could use this frame for some serious mountain climbing, biking, mountain biking, then you'd want to change that fork totally out. That fork is a Suntour M3030. There's some nice close-ups for you of the rust that I had to peel off. And but if the parts for this are kind of hard to find, but I found them, and as you'll see, I got it all together. Once again, the GoPro, it's man, I just do not understand. There's got to be a better camera out there. There really does. So anyway, that's the inner right there. Those are the inner parts of the fork. Their spring is only on one side, and it rests on top of that bolt. And those are the caps to screw into the outer part of the fork there to tension it up. And then there's these dust caps right here, which were completely ruined, which is why it was rusted all down inside that outer fork there that I'm tapping on right now. So this is going to be a little bit of a different journey for the garage. It was one of those things that I just ran across when Bubba and I were in the forest. And if this thing was sitting there and it didn't look like it looked like someone would come back for it, then I would have left it. But the vines were just wrapped around it, and I had to cut them, pull them off, and there were stickers all around it. The tires were flat, so it'd been there. It'd been there for a good year at least. So anyway, what's going to happen here is while I build on this, there's going to be a few videos where I have to narrate like I'm doing now. Oh, I'm touching the brake shifting cables there. Those are going to have to be changed out, and I'll show you that as well. But if it wasn't sitting there for a long time, I wouldn't have wheeled it back home. So on to the next part here, which is coming up, where we dig into a little bit more. So here's the bike. I've got it pretty much torn down, and I'm trying to save the old derailleur. The rear derailleur I tried to save, but it was, as you can imagine, those bolts that I'm pointing to there, the one that's sticking out, was totally rusted. So I'm going to have to get a new one. And here are the hubs. Now this is the rear hub. I'm going to totally rebuild it and take off the cassette, which is right there. And those are the ball bearings from the cassette. It takes a special tool to get this cassette off. And it was a little bit loose. And that right there is what screws into the back of the cassette. It holds one set of ball bearings in the rear towards the spokes. And then the front ones, you can see there, the ball bearings are still in the cassette. So what I'm going to do is check the ball bearings, see if they're reusable. If not, I'm going to replace them, and then I'm going to grease it all back up again. Now, that cassette right there is the one that screws on to the hub. You'll see this, maybe you'll see this down here. You can see the threads right there that I'm pointing at that are off the part that's sticking out of the hub, which is where the skewer goes. So this is how I'm doing the hub. I'm put the ball bearings, you put the grease in first, and then you just sort of drop the ball bearings into the hub as gently as possible. Make sure you count how many come out so you can put them back in. Setting the cassette back on top of it, then you screw the cassette back onto that inner part of the hub, and then that lock ring there is counterclockwise. Here I am putting the, after everything's been rebuilt here and greased up, I'm putting the lock ring back in. Once again, we are, we go the opposite direction, not lefty-loosey here. It's lefty, it goes on. So, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it's completely the opposite. So here I'm just using a small punch to get the threads started, and these are really tough. There's a special tool for these things, but you really don't need them for these cassettes. These, by the way, are Suntour components. And so the very old Suntour components. I'm not sure if you really see. You usually see a cassette like this on cheaper models, which this mountain bike was a cheaper model. Really, the frame is the best thing about the whole thing. And so, anyway, I'm just screwing this hub or this cassette back together again. There's the tool, and you put it in the back there to really sort of snug down all the bearings. You don't want to go too tight, and you also don't want to go too loose. You want it just tight enough where there's no more play in the cassette. You don't want to hear any clunking as you move it back and forth while it's on the wheel hub itself. But that's pretty much how you get the cassette back together and how you put new bearings on it. By the way, that cassette was really rusted. I had to wire brush it, all the rust off of it. And then it screws right there where I'm pointing my finger now. That's where the cassette screws on. All right, so the next part here is, I think this is the last part before my sound automatically just all of a sudden came back, the dust caps. The dust caps, this was one of the hardest things to find. They don't make them anymore. You can't really find them out into the parts houses, eBay, whatever. And so I had a little bit of time here that I was frustrated with trying to find the parts. In this case, what happened with the dust caps, and right there, that inner sleeve I grabbed, which also I'm changing out. Those are brand new. They are more easy to find, the sleeves, but go inside right there into the outer part of the fork. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to chip out the old inner sleeves, plastic nylon sleeves, so they ride nice and tight on the inner part of the forks that got rusted. And then the dust caps go over the top of that. That'll keep out water and rain and whatnot. So at this point, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the dust caps, but I do have the inner sleeves there, and those inner sleeves are going to go in next. There's those sleeves, by the way, you can easily find on, as I said, on eBay, and they're very cheap. I mean, there's really nothing to this fork at all. It's kind of amazing it all stays together. And even the bad ones were in decent shape. So here we go now. Okay, I got the old sleeves out. I kind of had to crack them out, and I used a little chisel to crack it and to get it out. The new sleeves have a little tab right there, and those go in just exactly like this, because there's a little notch right here in the Suntour M series forks that it clips into. There's an O-ring right here, rubber O-ring, and I just reused the old ones, and I rubbed it with a little bit of, this is old, but white lithium grease. Just a little bit of white lithium grease around the ring, and then I used a little bit of Shimano free hub grease for the outsides of the plastic so it doesn't get all gunked up and stuck like the old ones were. Now, they should just press in. So, let me make sure I've got this oriented correctly. And I think I might be able to do this with one hand. But there's the clip right there. You can see it, and that faces you as you push the sleeve in. And then really, it's just that's it. So they go in really easy, okay? All right. Hang loose. Okay, so what I'm doing here now, since that was the only one, that the GoPro picked up, I have no idea why. I'm looking at the dust caps here. I've got one good dust cap, that old one, that I sort of repaired a little bit. That'll do good enough while I look for the other ones. And here are the inner forks. Now, you can pretty much tell here that these forks were chewed up. What I did is I first used phosphoric acid on these, and then I took like it's a high speed grinder with really a paint stripping flap on it. And what that does is it neutralizes the phosphoric acid. You can see the pitting right there, by the way. And then because when you use phosphoric acid, it re-rusts eventually, so it has to be neutralized. This is even the case, and even worse the case, if you had something like muriatic acid that you were using. So these inner forks now have been pretty much stripped and sanded. First, I did the flap on it and sanded, and so sort of moving my hand up and down there, it's smooth enough. It's not perfect, like I said. There's not gonna be, maybe it'll break in a little bit and you'll get some response for the front fork shock, but it's gonna take some time to break in a little bit because some of that chrome is just completely gone. And the chrome provides a nice, slick, smooth surface. So the rest of the thing that I've got to do here is I've got some cables to replace. All the shift cables for sure have to be replaced on this bike. They were rusted. Not only was the rear derailleur rusted, but the front derailleur cable was kind of rusty and not responsive. So what I'll be doing then here is I will be prepping the outer fork to go on. Then I'm also going to be stringing new cables to the rear derailleur from the shifters up front, thumb shifters to the rear derailleur whenever that gets here, and I have to buy a new one. And then also to the front derailleur so it can shift on the 3 speeds up front. Here is once again, here is the outer fork. And the outer fork got new dust caps from... Okay, we finally got the original part ends, the Suntour. They call them wipers, which is interesting because it's really a dust seal. So there's the old one that I salvaged. There's the new one. And there's a spare that who knows if I'll ever need. I need to say something about this real quick. When I looked at the parts manual for Suntour M3030 shocks, which, as I said before, they're really a cheap shock. But this is just a project to get this thing back on the road again, since it's not going to be used for competition or anything. But anyway, this bolt goes through under here, slides in, and then the spring goes inside on top of it. But when I looked at the parts manual, there were 2 pieces missing. There was 1, a washer, and 2, like a rubber damper that's supposed to go on this bolt on the inside. Both of those were missing. So this would be just like, imagine if you're going over rocks or something like that and this thing is bouncing up and down. The bolt head would have been pounding against this bottom here. So there's supposed to be a rubber piece, kind of like this, but much smaller, on the inside of this piece here to dampen it when it comes back to full length. So I had to manufacture something up because they don't sell the part anymore. And I mean, they do not sell the part anymore. So I grabbed, well, the best thing I could find is a rubber stopper. And I drilled a hole through it, and then I just cut off the end where it's narrow enough to fit pretty much inside this part of the fork, so it would hit this and then dampen it. Now all I need to do is grease up the outside of the fork here, and then or the inner part of the fork here, and then the outer part of the fork can go on. And I'll show you what that looks like when I do it. Okay, here she is, all done. Fork is on, and I took it out for a spin. It's a little stiff yet, probably because of the new plastic guides that I put inside here. But I think that'll work its way out. I got the back brake was giving me a little problem. I had to adjust it a little bit. Had to adjust the front derailleur. Back derailleur I definitely had to adjust. because, sorry about that, I'm using one hand on this and one hand on the bike, because it wouldn't get up to the top gear. That's the 7th gear on the back. So I had to tweak with the new derailleur, rear derailleur, and mess with the adjusting screws to get it to come up here, and then I had to tighten the cable a little bit. Other than that, for 50 bucks, this is not bad. I mean, it's not as good as new, but if you ever see an old truck 3500 frame that somebody's just thrown away, man, grab it. It's a strong frame, and while the components that are on it are not the best, you could always upgrade components, but it's a solid bike. I put basically a road bike seat on it. It's the only thing I had. They had that big Huffy with the springs on it on here, and I think that just looks gay. So so I got that on there, and it fits and works okay, and that's pretty much it. There's your 3500 rebuild, especially the M3030 Suntour spring shock forks and the Shimano system components, especially on the back, a brand new derailleur, because the old one was just rusted. So that's it. That's the rebuild. If you have any questions, let me know. Put it in the comments, and hang loose. All right.